Okay, MOvember 2020, day 3. For the video I want to do tonight is going to be part of that 5-part series on a functional adult from Pia Mellody out of her work Breaking Free. But tonight I'll probably do a shout out to the Boundaries book of Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend that was sort of, I think, reissued about 2017. Comes with a workbook that's probably a great resource, especially if you're a Christian person. It's a Christian resource. Pia's stuff is a secular resource, but certainly is heavily into spirituality. But she separates boundaries into 3 parts: physical, sexual, and internal. So tonight we're going to do the external boundaries, which are the physical and sexual. So I'm going to read a little bit, explain a little bit, and hopefully you will get some direction if you're struggling with boundaries. So it says here, setting external boundaries. After improving self-esteem, the next component of recovery is to devise healthy boundaries, both to protect yourself from others and to keep yourself from authentically offending others. Our boundary system has 2 subsystems, external and sexual. Our external system protects us physically and sexually. Let me read that again. Our external boundary system protects us physically and sexually and helps us keep an appropriate physical distance from others and respect the sexual boundaries of others. The internal boundaries are related to thinking, feeling, and behaving, and will be discussed in the next section. I'm going to do that video tomorrow night. The purpose of the exercises Pia lays out here is you did the first exercise towards establishing boundaries when you evaluated the condition of each part of your boundary system in step 1. Now, what she's saying there, in the middle part of this book, it gets us to look at, as a result of childhood trauma, how do we now struggle in our adult life with boundaries? So what she gets you to do in the first part, based on her premise that we're powerless over ourselves, is where do we violate others' boundaries? And so here she's saying that if we need, if we've done step 1, we've got that data. How do I violate other people's boundaries physically and sexually? So she's asking us to look at that. And she gets us to review that. And I suppose what she then offers us here is the information of how to identify what we need to do to set up external boundaries and physical and sexually. So boundary recovery begins when you acknowledge and accept these 3 statements. 1, nobody has the right to touch you, an adult, without your permission. Also, nobody has the right to be sexual with you without your permission. And 2, people who have your permission to touch you may touch you only in the way in which you want to be touched. Also, people with whom you have agreed to be sexual may only be sexual in the ways that you have agreed to. And 3, it's your responsibility to take control over how, when, where, and who touches you, and with whom, when, and how you will be sexual. You are in recovery when you exercise those controls with most people, except with a major offender. Now, boundaries aren't a shield of steel. They're not magic. We can only set them with people that are sort of observing consent. If someone's a major offender and going to violate your boundaries, we've got to keep ourselves safe. So determine where your external boundary is. And this is an exercise for, if you've been developmentally traumatized, sometimes we're really disconnected from the way our body gives us information. So this is a way to help you determine how to get a sense of where your external boundary needs to be. So determining where your external boundary is. Begin to develop your awareness of when other people are too close to you. Take note of your discomfort when people stand or move too close to you. And this will make you more aware of when you need to take care of yourself. I have used 2 methods to help me become mindful of my own requirements for physical distance from others. 1, stand across the room from someone and make eye contact with him or her. Walk slowly toward the person and stop when you start feeling uncomfortable. Then back up and stand where you feel comfortable. The distance between you and the other person shows how large your external boundary is. The amount of physical distance you need varies as you approach different people depending on many factors, such as how well you know the other person and how you're responding to that person at the time, and so on. 2, another simple gauge of a comfortable distance between you and someone else is to look at that person in the eye, and if it is difficult for you, if it is difficult or you can't, the person is probably too close to you. The amount of distance you need from another person can be different on various occasions with the same person. For instance, if my husband Pat and I are getting along and I feel good about our relationship, he can stand close to me and I'm very comfortable. If, however, he's angry with me or I'm angry with him, we don't stand so close. If we're extremely angry, we may actually stand 18 feet away from each other in the living room to talk. Also, the distance you need varies from person to person. You can allow people who feel safe to get closer to you. You require more distance from other people who feel more threatening for whatever reason. And as you develop boundaries, you will be able to back away from such people and negotiate the distance between you, not letting them stand too close to you any longer. So what to do? So you ask 2 or 3 safe people, members of your Codependents Anonymous group, a sponsor or spouse, and try the physical test for yourself. So 1, ask each person for permission to walk towards them and him or her until you feel the energy of resistance in your own body. Now this is important because sometimes for some of us we're really disconnected, for some of us we're over vigilant. So this is a test to see where that's at. I've done this test with folks where they walk right up and you've got to have the other person just say, stop, that's close enough. And for others, they stand way away because they need that amount of safety. This is really tuning into how much space I need. And like Pia says there, it can be really an in-the-moment spontaneous experience. John Bradshaw said that being toxically shamed, so being someone that's been injured by abuse, means that we cease to be a spontaneous person, and that's what disconnects us from the data we need to set boundaries. So in the third section of this book on reparenting, she talks about knowing our reality, because you can't set a boundary if you don't know your reality. So this is just practicing getting to know your own body and tuning into it. For some people, this is very easy. For others, it can be really difficult, and you're just trying to establish what that is for you. So she says, get a couple of people together and ask if you can practice that resistance. Stop walking and note the distance. Try and look him or her in the eye at that distance. And if you need to adjust in order to make eye contact, do so and note the distance. So what she's saying there, you might get close physically, but when you look them in the eye, you might go, and I need to step back a little, or you might feel comfortable and drawn to them and step a little bit closer. But make that adjustment. And the fourth one is then ask that person if your boundary distance feels comfortable to him or her. If not, ask how he or she would adjust it, and note the person's preference, while still keeping in mind that your need for space is your own and will often be different from that of other people. It is functional for the person needing the most space to be given the space by the other person. And so she just gets you to record that. So do it in your journaling. Just write, what's the experience like? Because you might want to be closer, and the other person says, no, I need to be back. And I know when I've worked with people with this, it's whoever needs the most space needs to get it. The expectation that somehow you're going to surrender your boundary so I can be closer it makes us an offender to their reality. And when we talk about that only I can determine distance and touch with others, same goes for them. And I just need to note the impact. So if I need a bit more space and someone else feels a bit abandoned, that's okay. I can work with that. I need to acknowledge that, gosh, me needing more space is understandable, and that it's had an impact on someone else, and they need to be able to share with us, gosh, I feel, God, it brings up for me, or you don't like me, or I'm unlovable. We've still got to set that boundary space that we need. So she gets you to journal that and write that down. And then there's a visualization for that, because sometimes we can, some people are stronger audio learners, so a statement is good, and for others, the visual. So I'm just going to talk about how you would visualize an external boundary based on an exercise, something like that. So she says here, visualizing your external boundary. You can strengthen your external boundary by visualizing it in concrete form. While the visualizing can be done in many ways, here is a way I find helpful. Close your eyes and imagine a jar made of a sturdy but expandable material. In your mind, enlarge this jar until it's big enough to fit over you. This jar represents your external boundary. It is not appropriate ever to let anyone inside your boundary. Practicing expanding your boundary to get distance and then pulling it close to you to receive a hug or to be sexual. With this boundary in place in your mind, proceed as follows. So the idea is a boundary needs to be able to move in and out. It's very flexible, and it needs to be a spontaneous response to incoming data. So if I'm approaching my best friend and I give him a hug, then the boundary's right up to my skin. But then if my friend says, man, I want to speak to you about something that happened last week, I might step back a little bit and put my boundary out. And then when they start talking, you go, oh man, yeah, I remember last week. That was tough. We had a real confrontation. I might even extend my boundary out even further as I step back. But through the process of reconciling and making amends, we might end up finishing with a hug and the boundary comes right back to my skin again. The point P is making is even in sexual intimacy, I need to have that boundary accessible. Because sometimes in sexual intimacy, something might happen where I feel uncomfortable, I don't feel good, I feel physically uncomfortable, emotionally uncomfortable, and I might need to say stop. And I might need to expand that boundary out so I've got more space. So the idea then will be, and this is where our reality and the fourth reparenting area is noting our needs and wants, that this gets difficult when we've grown up and not had our boundaries acknowledged, or not being taught that it's okay to value ourselves by setting boundaries. So when we start to act in our own best interest, it can be really confronting in recovery, and actually being boundaryless can feel safer or more normal than actually starting to act in our own best interest. So this is not going to be easy, and sometimes we need a lot of support to even work out what our boundary needs to be, and to be able to celebrate the no in ourselves and celebrate the no in someone else. So the next thing I want to quickly talk about is sexual boundaries, but I'm going to talk about physical and sexual when it comes to setting them. So the physical boundary. Set your physical external boundary by memorizing and saying this statement to yourself. I have the right to determine who touches me, when, where, and how that person touches me, and how close to me I allow that person to stand, and vice versa. With this statement, you claim ownership over your body and acknowledge that nobody has the right to stand too close to you or touch you without your permission. On the other hand, as you give yourself the right to have a self-determined boundary, you also give other people the right to determine how close you get and whether you get to touch them. Each of us has the right to negotiate that space and distance. For example, if you're uncomfortable because somebody is standing too close, you might say to that person, you're standing too close, would you move back? Would you please move back? Perhaps someone you don't know walks up to you and puts their arms around you. His action is not sexual, but he is just too close physically for your comfort. You have the right to turn and say graciously, I don't know you well enough for you to put your arm around me, and I'm uncomfortable. Would you please take your arm down and step back? You can't stop him from touching you if you don't see him coming, but you can set your boundary as soon as you feel comfortable. I do this for myself with strangers, with friends, with my husband and my kids, and I allow them to do this with me too. It's imperative for legitimate peace and security to be able to set boundaries. Yet people who have been physically abused often have a lot of difficulty asking others to move or saying no to anyone who gets too close to them for comfort. They think they are being rude or that they don't have the right to tell someone not to touch them. But this fear and reticence is part of the disease of codependence, and I would say that part of developmental trauma disorder. Every adult has the right to determine what is done to him in their own body. Everyone has the right and the duty to set boundaries when relating to other people. The sexual boundary. Just as you did for your physical boundary, visualize your sexual boundary as an inverted jar, and then set your sexual boundary by memorizing and saying this statement to yourself. I have the right to determine with whom, where, when, and how I will be sexual, and vice versa. This means that nobody has the right to tell you that you have to be sexual with him or her, nor tell you how, when, where you will be sexual. You alone determine that. You need only face the consequences of your choices. On the other hand, as you determine that boundary for yourself, you also give any other person who you might relate to sexually the right to make the determination for himself or herself. So if you're trying to negotiate being sexual with your spouse who says no thank you, that's the end of it. He or she has the right to tell you no. no, I don't want to be sexual with you now. Or he or she might need to say, yes, I want to be sexual, but no, I don't want to do it in that way. This boundary allows you to be sexually protected and also act appropriately with others. Your sexual boundary determines not only whether or not you will be sexual, but also in what ways you will be sexual. For example, Irene might want to be sexual with her husband Jim, but not in a particular way Jim wants to. For example, her breasts hurt when she doesn't want him to touch, and she doesn't want him to touch them. So how does she set her boundary to exclude a specific kind of sexual behavior with which she is not comfortable, without excluding sexual behavior for her husband? First, she says, I'll be sexual with you, but my breasts are sore tonight, so please be careful about touching them. She has her imaginary jar, sexual boundary, pulled close as if glued to her to allow Jim to come close to her body. But when the boundary comes to her breast, she imagined the boundary bubbling out there. Use the following to write about instances where you have noticed that someone has crossed your physical and sexual boundaries, and describe the situation and what you did and said, if anything, to protect yourself. And I'm going to pause there because that's the way that Pia works with boundaries. She really does ask you to become aware. And so I'll just read you this last piece and then I'm going to close. So tracking improvement. As you recover regarding this symptom, you will notice that you are better able to negotiate distance and touch with others physically and sexually. You may feel less vulnerable, able to say no, less anti-dependent, able to ask for physical or sexual nurturing, and less needless and wantless, more able to recognize your need for physical space, physical affection, more sex, less sex, or different kinds of sexual behaviors, and more able to express your feelings about your needs and wants. And she, Pia's, if there's a big message about any of that early developmental trauma work, is that it's about raising our awareness. And so I hope tonight around external boundaries that was useful. I mean, I know in my own life, I didn't grow up in a family where your body was sort of your own and it could be hit by others. I grew up in a generation where you could be hit at school by teachers if you'd done something wrong. So I also grew up in a family in a generation where we didn't really get sexual education and information, being told that it's okay to nurture, to protect yourself and say no and celebrate the no. So learning to set boundaries in early recovery, knowing how to set boundaries and getting more comfortable setting them is a critical part of recovery. So I hope that was useful. That's part of Pia Mellody's work. You can find her books online. That book, again, was Breaking Free by Pia Mellody. But a more modern version of boundaries, as I said before, is that book by John Townsend and Henry Cloud. This is MOvember. Each night I'm going to talk about some sort of tool. If you want to donate to MOvember, that's great. I'll put the link to my page at the end. It's about men's health. And just to finish on boundaries, Pia Mellody said that the most important functional skill that someone needs to learn is boundaries, because if we don't become really conscious about them and learn to do them, we either become a victim or an offender to others. So go well, be gentle with your heart, and I look forward to another video tomorrow. Bye.